Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey drifts through a question both intimate and infinite. Why do no two minds see the same world? You'll hear stories of how the brain doesn't just see reality, it creates it. How your heartbeat, your breath, even your gut shape what you call the self, and why in the end reality itself may be a shared dream we keep stitching together through empathy and perception. But before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights, settle your body, and let your breath find an easy rhythm. If these quiet explorations help you rest, I'd love if you could like this video, subscribe for more calm science journeys, and leave a comment to tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places and time zones our little community gathers from. Now, whenever you're ready, let's drift gently into the illusion of shared reality and explore why every mind paints the world a little differently, yet somehow, beautifully, we still find each other within it. There's a moment every night when the world quietly disappears. Not with the closing of your eyes, but in that deeper slide, the instant when thoughts dissolve and there is no longer anyone there to notice. Under deep anesthesia it happens too. Surgeons lift away a part of the skull, machines hum, voices pass overhead. But for you, there is nothing. No colour, no sound, no time. And when you wake, you never remember the moment it all went dark. Because in that interval, there was no you to do the remembering. That silent erasure is our most reliable clue to what consciousness is. It's not merely being alive, it's not just electrical activity in the brain. It is the difference between a body that breathes and a being that experiences breathing. As philosopher Thomas Nagel once wrote, "For a conscious organism, there is something it is like to be that organism. There's something it feels like to be a bat or a person, but nothing it feels like to be a table or a teaspoon of salt. When the lights of consciousness flicker off, the machinery remains, but the world vanishes." That distinction between living motion and lived experience is the subtle border we're trying to find. Neuroscience can measure the firing of neurons, the shifting of oxygen through the blood, even the whisper of electrical fields across the cortex. But none of those signals alone can explain why warm light floods the mind in one moment and disappears in the next. To understand, we must first look inward to that most private of all sensations, the feeling of being present. You might notice it right now if you focus gently on the sense of awareness itself, the background hum that remains even when thoughts fade. That faint hum is the closest we ever come to touching consciousness directly. And yet, it's so familiar that we overlook its strangeness. The redness of red, the sharp edge of pain, the taste of morning coffee. These are not just facts about the world, they are textures of experience woven uniquely in your mind. You can describe them, name them, even measure their neural correlates. But the feeling itself remains locked inside, impossible to export. This is the paradox Anil Seth likes to remind us of. Consciousness is both the most obvious and the most mysterious thing we know. We swim in it every second of our lives, and yet, when we try to explain it, it slips through our fingers. Like water cupped in the palm, the tighter we grasp, the faster it drains away. Imagine for a moment that you could look into another person's mind, not to read their thoughts, but to see their colours as they see them. Would their blue feel like your blue? Would their pain burn with the same temperature? Or would it be like peering into an alien landscape painted with familiar names but foreign hues? Even within our own species, consciousness is not a single shared screen. It's more like a gallery of private paintings hung side by side, each lit by a slightly different lamp. When you say, "the world looks bright today," what you truly mean is, "my world looks bright." The assumption that others see what you see feel what you feel is perhaps the gentlest illusion that keeps society coherent, the illusion of a shared reality. The science of consciousness begins here, with humility. We cannot yet open the curtain and watch awareness emerge. We can only infer its presence in the flicker of a neural rhythm, in the return of a gaze, in the slow climb from anesthesia back to selfhood. Neuroscientists have learned to recognize these thresholds, mapping them with care, but those maps are like tracing the outlines of an island from space. They show the shape, not the feel of the sand beneath your feet. When you drift into sleep tonight, remember, the border between wakefulness and oblivion is not just a medical curiosity. It's the most ordinary miracle you perform each day. Without chemicals or circuits, your brain slides the world into silence and later brings it back again, complete with colours, thoughts, and a sense of I. No one truly knows how this reassembly happens. Some say consciousness is a spark of complexity. Others call it a function of prediction, a delicate guess your brain keeps refining. But for most of us, it simply feels like waking up. To study consciousness is to study that feeling. Not the noise of neurons, but the quiet that returns when you're gone. In that quiet lies the question that threads through all of tonight's journey. If your world vanishes when you sleep and returns when you wake, what kind of world is it really? Is it out there, waiting for you? Or does it live within the gentle light that turns on behind your eyes? As the hum of life slows and your breath finds its rhythm, hold that question softly. The answer won't arrive as a fact, but as a sensation, a reminder that the world you see tomorrow morning might not be the same one I see, even if we stand side by side. Because every mind, in its quiet way, dreams its own version of the dawn. When you open your eyes in the morning, the world rushes back as if it had been waiting outside the door all night. Light spills across the walls, shapes return to their names, and the steady hum of the room reclaims its rhythm. It feels as though reality was simply paused while you slept, that everyone else saw the same sunrise, felt the same cool air, and heard the same bird song. But that, as it turns out, is another gentle illusion. The truth is quieter and stranger. No two minds ever wake into quite the same world. Each of us builds a private version of reality, one that feels objective because it's so seamless we forget we're building it at all. The colours you see, the tones you hear, the warmth you feel on your skin, all of these are reconstructions. They are not properties of the world itself, but interpretations your brain paints from incomplete and noisy signals. It's tempting to think of perception as a camera, taking in the world and sending the images straight to your mind. But the brain doesn't work like a camera. It works more like a storyteller who's missing most of the plot. With only fragments of light, sound, and touch, it guesses what should be there, fills in the blanks, and quietly edits the story to make sense. That's why what we see feels so effortless. The guessing has already happened before we're aware of it. Neuroscientists sometimes call this process predictive processing, but you could think of it more simply as the brain's habit of dreaming with its eyes open. Instead of passively receiving the world, it actively proposes one. Every moment it asks, what's most likely out there, given what I know? The signals from your senses then act like corrections, nudging the internal dream toward reality. In a sense, perception is a negotiation between the mind's expectations and the world's replies. You can see this negotiation at work in one of the most famous modern illusions, a photo of an ordinary dress that split the internet in half. To some, it looked blue and black. To others, gold and white. People argued, tested monitors, checked colour codes, yet the disagreement never fully resolved. Because the difference wasn't in the image, it was in the assumptions each brain made about the light around it. Those who unconsciously assumed the photo was taken in bright daylight subtracted the bluish hue of the sun and saw gold. Those who thought it was taken in shadow added blue back in. Each brain corrected for what it believed the lighting should be, and both were certain they were right. This isn't a rare glitch, it's how perception always works. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as your brain predicts it to be. The world you inhabit is the result of billions of micro-corrections shaped by your history, your body, and even your mood. If you wake anxious, the shadows grow sharper. If you wake calm, colours soften. To you, those changes feel like the world shifting. In truth, it's the light of your own mind bending ever so slightly. The philosopher Immanuel Kant once wrote that we never experience the world as it is, only as it appears through the filter of our mind's categories. Neuroscience now adds a physical texture to his insight. The mind's filter is built from the rhythms of neurons firing in synchrony, predicting patterns before they occur. When one rhythm falters, the whole world can change. People emerging from anesthesia, for example, often describe a strange sense of unreality. Not because the world has changed, but because the mind's rhythm hasn't yet found its beat. Even time itself is part of this quiet construction. The seconds you feel stretching or collapsing are not the ticking of an external clock, but your brain's changing estimate of how much is happening. When you wait for an elevator, time drags because prediction errors pile up. The world keeps defying your expectation that the doors should open. When you're lost in music, prediction and feedback line up perfectly, and time seems to vanish. So why, if each of us lives in a private simulation, do our realities overlap as well as they do? How can you and I both look at the same cup of tea and agree that it's sitting on the table? Because the brain's predictions are not arbitrary. They're shaped by shared biology and by years of conversation with the same world. We inherit similar sensory organs, learn the same meanings for colours and shapes, and grow within overlapping cultures of expectation. The miracle is not that our worlds differ, but that they align as much as they do. Still, beneath that alignment, subtle differences ripple. Consider a colourblind artist who paints sunsets from memory, guided by warmth rather than hue, or a person whose first language lacks certain emotional words. Their feelings may be no less vivid, but they unfold along different contours. Each of us occupies a slightly unique perceptual niche, sculpted by our body, language, and experience. This realization can feel isolating, as if we're each sealed in a private dream. But it can also feel tender, a reminder that empathy itself is a kind of translation. When we listen to another person, we're reaching across two worlds that never perfectly overlap, doing our best to imagine what theirs might be like. Every act of understanding is an act of creation. Perhaps that's what it means to live among other minds, to accept that the world we share is only ever approximately shared. The tree outside your window, the voice of someone you love, the colour of twilight. These are bridges between private universes, not common ground beneath our feet. And yet, the bridges hold. We build them every time we speak, gesture, or simply look into each other's eyes. If consciousness is a private dream, then language is the soft murmur that lets our dreams touch. And though each of us sees through a slightly different lens, those differences don't divide us. They give texture to the human mosaic. The illusion of a shared reality is not a mistake. It's the glue that holds our separate stories together. So when you wake tomorrow and look around, remember, the world you see is both yours alone and quietly shared. It is a painting half imagined, half observed, kept in harmony by the patient negotiation between your mind and everything it believes is out there. The stars above you, the sound of a friend's laughter, even the feel of your own breath, all of them shimmer at the boundary where private worlds meet. And perhaps that shimmer, that fragile overlap, is what we mean when we say we live in the same world. There are mornings when you wake but feel as though you haven't yet arrived. Your eyes open, your body stirs, yet something inside you is still missing, as if the mind's light has turned on only halfway. Slowly, a sense of place returns, then a sense of self. The ceiling comes into focus, a memory of the day flickers through, and only then do you become fully present again. That gradual ascent is not just the process of waking up, it's a soft reassembly of 3 delicate layers of consciousness. How awake you are, what you are aware of, and who it is that seems to be doing the experiencing. Anil Seth often divides consciousness into these 3 threads: level, content, and selfhood. The first is simple enough to grasp, the difference between deep sleep, dreaming, and wakefulness. It's what anesthesiologists monitor when they check if a patient has gone under. The second is the content of consciousness, the actual scenes and sensations that fill awareness. The third, selfhood, is the most intimate and slippery. It's the sense of being the subject behind the scenes, the quiet narrator who says, "I am here." To imagine these layers, picture a calm lake at sunrise. The level is the depth of the water, whether it's frozen still, gently rippling, or stirred into waves. The content is the reflection on its surface, clouds, trees, passing birds, and the self is the point from which you look at the lake and call it mine. Sometimes the water stirs, but the reflection vanishes. Sometimes the view remains, but the one who sees it seems to fade away. Doctors can often tell when the level of consciousness changes. Brain activity shifts into slow, sweeping waves during dreamless sleep, then bursts into rapid, irregular ripples when we awaken. These patterns are the music of neurons, syncing and desyncing across regions. Not a formula to calculate awareness, but a rhythm that whispers when the mind has surfaced. Yet measuring content, what a person is conscious of, is far more elusive. Scientists can guess at it by asking subjects what they see or hear, or by training computers to decode patterns in brain activity. Still, what's measured is not the experience itself, but its faint shadow. Imagine trying to know a painting by listening to the brush strokes. That's how far removed data often is from the inner picture. Selfhood, meanwhile, is more mysterious still. There are moments, in meditation, in art, in extreme flow, when the sense of I evaporates. A violinist lost in music doesn't feel a self playing, only the movement exists. A runner deep in stride becomes the rhythm itself. Even a writer, mid-sentence, forgets who is typing. These are not losses of consciousness, but transformations of it. The lake still reflects the world, but the observer has stepped aside. Neuroscience finds echoes of this disappearance. The brain's networks that monitor body ownership and internal state, often near the insula and the parietal regions, quiet during deep immersion. At the same time, sensory and motor areas hum in perfect coordination, as if the system is running without commentary. When awareness returns, we often describe such experiences as effortless, peaceful, or transcendent. It's as though the narrator took a brief vacation and the story continued on its own. Still, most of our waking life unfolds with all 3 layers intact. We drift through shifting levels, alert, drowsy, focused, distracted, while our contents and our sense of self weave constantly around them. The ordinary miracle is how seamlessly they stay in tune. You might be cooking dinner, humming a tune, planning tomorrow and remembering yesterday, all while feeling solidly you. Beneath that stability, however, is a dance of systems predicting, comparing, and updating each other thousands of times per second. Some theories describe this coordination in gentle equations, but it's easier to imagine as a choir keeping harmony. The brain's regions are like voices that must stay loosely synchronized. When their rhythm drifts apart, the song of consciousness begins to falter. Under anesthesia, the coordination collapses, the melody stops. During a dream, it returns, but with new instruments and less control. And during a seizure, the song overwhelms itself. Too much rhythm, too little variation. Consciousness, it seems, lives in the delicate balance between order and chaos, between the predictable and the surprising. If we step back from the science for a moment, we might notice that our everyday emotions follow the same pattern. When everything is perfectly predictable, life feels dull, consciousness dimmed by routine. When it's too chaotic, we feel fear and confusion. But between those extremes lies the sweet spot, enough structure to feel safe, enough novelty to feel alive. In that balance, awareness feels vibrant yet calm. What then is the self that experiences all this? It may not be the solid core we imagine. Instead, it could be a kind of controlled hallucination. The brain's best guess at what body and mind belong together right now. Your heartbeat, your breath, the pressure of the chair beneath you. These sensations anchor the idea of me. When those signals drift, the self begins to blur. That's why losing balance or feeling feverish can feel strangely unreal, as if your mind momentarily forgets who it belongs to. In this view, consciousness isn't a single light switch but a constellation of lights, some bright, some faint, flickering together. To ask where the self ends and the world begins is to ask where the reflection ends and the lake begins. There is no clear edge, only interaction. The mind predicts the body informs the mind. Together they produce the simple miracle of being here. Tonight, as you listen, that miracle is unfolding quietly. Your eyes may grow heavy, but awareness lingers, shifting its level, changing its content, softening the sense of self that holds it all together. Each breath is a small recalibration between body and mind. Each slow heartbeat says, "I'm still here," even as the edges of you begin to blur. If consciousness is layered, level, content, self, then sleep itself is a nightly rehearsal of how easily those layers loosen and reform. Soon your awareness may drift down the slope again, past thought, past image, into the stillness where the lights go dim but never entirely out. And when you wake, you'll rise once more through the layers, gathering the pieces of your world and quietly remembering that you are the one to whom it all belongs. For most of history, consciousness was a story told only from the inside. The body could be dissected, the heart weighed, the bones measured, but the mind remained hidden, like a song you could hear only if you were the one singing. Then, in the last century, a quiet revolution began. The invention of machines that could listen to the brain without cutting into it. These devices do not read thoughts, not really, but they trace the rhythms that make thought possible, the soft electrical tides that rise and fall beneath every feeling and idea. The most famous of these instruments is the fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance scanner. To imagine how it works, think of a patient lying inside a humming metal tunnel, surrounded by magnets strong enough to tug at atoms. The machine does not see neurons firing directly. Instead, it listens for their echoes, the small changes in blood oxygen that follow bursts of activity. Each time a cluster of neurons works harder, the blood flowing through that area changes its magnetic whisper. The fMRI translates those whispers into shifting patterns of colour, the glowing maps you see in textbooks and news articles, reds and yellows pulsing across a grey brain. But those colours are only shadows. They do not capture the millisecond dance of neurons. They record the slow pulse of energy that follows seconds later. So when you see a bright spot on an image and someone says, "This is where love happens," what they really mean is, this is where the oxygen moved after the neurons joined in the song. It is indirect, a kind of astronomical map for the inner cosmos, where the light of a distant star reaches us long after the moment it burned. If fMRI listens to blood, EEG listens to electricity. Electroencephalography, a word far too long for bedtime, simply means placing small sensors on the scalp to catch the brain's faint electrical fields. When neurons fire together, they create a collective hum that travels through the skull, like the faint vibration of bees in a hive. EEG can't pinpoint where each signal begins, but it can hear when they change. It's fast, quick enough to follow the flicker of awareness itself. Some people describe its rhythm as brain waves, and that image is close enough. Gentle ripples of activity that rise when you open your eyes and slow when you drift towards sleep. To read an EEG trace is to watch consciousness breathing. High, fast waves signal alertness, neurons chattering across regions of the cortex. As you relax, the rhythm slows, the peaks soften, and the lines settle into calm, rolling curves. An anesthesiologist can glance at such patterns and know when the patient has slipped beneath the surface, just as a sailor can read the calmness of the sea and know the depth below. Both methods have their limits. fMRI offers beautiful images but lags behind real time, like a long exposure photograph that blurs motion into colour. EEG captures the speed of thought but not its precise geography. It hears the orchestra without knowing where each instrument sits. There are other techniques too. Magnetoencephalography that measures magnetic fields instead of electricity, and optical imaging that tracks tiny changes in light as neurons shift their chemistry. Each is a new way of touching the untouchable, tracing the invisible dance that becomes a person. Scientists have even begun to blend these tools, layering time and space together like two halves of a broken mirror. Yet even with all this precision, there is still no James Webb telescope for the brain. Complexity, not distance, is what keeps us from seeing clearly. 80 billion neurons, each connected to thousands more, fire and adapt in a living storm of interactions. Every time we zoom in for detail, we lose the view of the whole. Every time we pull back to see the whole, the details vanish. Consciousness hides in that trade-off between the minute and the immense. Still, the instruments have given us wonders. We can watch the border between waking and sleeping unfold. In real time, see how the brain slowly folds memory into dreams, how regions that light up for language also shimmer when we talk silently to ourselves. Through these faint signals, scientists can glimpse how the mind navigates its own landscape, though they're careful not to mistake the map for the terrain. Sometimes people imagine these machines as windows into the soul, but perhaps it's better to think of them as stethoscopes pressed gently against the skull. They can tell us that the heart of the mind is beating, that its rhythm changes with thought and feeling, but they cannot yet translate the melody itself. No image can capture what it feels like to remember a song or to miss someone. The colours on the screen are beautiful, but they are not the music. They are the pattern left in the sand after the tide withdraws. And yet, even those traces matter. They remind us that consciousness, for all its mystery, is still part of the physical world. Not a ghost in the machine, but a pattern woven through living matter. Each heartbeat, each breath, subtly reshapes the rhythm of the brain. When you inhale deeply, electrical waves shift in time with your lungs. When you hold your breath, your brain's song changes key. The boundary between thought and body is far thinner than we imagine. Perhaps that's why these technologies feel both miraculous and humble. They show us that awareness is not a light shining from outside nature, but one of nature's own flickers, something the universe does when it briefly looks at itself. And in that sense, every glowing brain scan, every wavy EEG line, is a small self-portrait of the cosmos, consciousness tracing the shape of consciousness. If you listen closely, maybe you can sense a similar rhythm in yourself right now, a gentle pulse behind your eyes, a wave that rises and falls with your breath. The machines we build to study the brain are just mirrors for that quiet tide. They translate it into colour and line, but the original melody is playing inside you this very moment, steady, intricate, and endlessly alive. As the hum of those invisible machines fades from your imagination, you might picture their lights dimming in laboratories around the world, soft red and blue glows cooling into darkness. Somewhere, a scientist leans back in their chair watching the last scan appear on a screen and wonders what it all truly means. For now, the answer remains just beyond the reach of measurement. The mind, after all, is not only a thing that can be seen, it is the one doing the seeing. And perhaps the best any instrument can do is remind us how extraordinary it is to be the light that looks back. Imagine standing before a great mosaic, a wall made of thousands of tiny coloured stones. From far away the image seems clear, perhaps a landscape or a human face, but up close it dissolves into chaos. Each piece is beautiful in its own right, yet none explains the picture. This is the challenge that neuroscience faces when it tries to link the tiny flashes of neurons to the vast landscape of conscious experience. For decades, researchers have collected what they call neural correlates of consciousness, patterns in the brain that change when awareness turns on or off, or when one kind of experience shifts into another. They have found thousands of such correlations. When you recognize a face, a patch in the temporal lobe lights up. When you feel pain, certain networks flare across the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex. When anesthesia takes hold, waves of activity slow and fragment. These discoveries are like coloured stones, striking, meaningful. Yet each one is only a fragment of the larger design. The real question is not where consciousness happens, but why those places matter. Why does a flutter of electricity in one patch of grey tissue correspond to the taste of coffee, while a similar flutter elsewhere means fear, or music, or nothing at all? Correlation is a beginning, but it's not understanding. It's like noticing that church bells ring whenever it rains, and concluding that bells cause clouds. The timing may align, but the reason lies elsewhere. Anil Seth often compares this stage of consciousness research to astronomy before Newton. Early astronomers could predict eclipses and track the paths of planets with incredible precision. They had the correlations right, but they didn't know why those patterns occurred. Then Newton's laws gave a mechanism, the invisible tug of gravity that connected all the motions together. Consciousness science stands in that earlier age now. It can map the heavens of the mind, but the hidden force behind the patterns remains uncertain. Some scientists believe that consciousness might emerge from the brain's ability to integrate information, to bind countless bits of data to a unified whole. Others think it arises when information becomes globally available, broadcast across the cortex like news on a radio network. Still others point to feedback loops, predicting and correcting signals until the brain's model of the world becomes so vivid it feels real. These are different languages for the same longing, to move from description to explanation. When we talk about these models, it helps to soften their technical edges. For instance, one famous idea speaks of integrated information and uses a symbol that looks like a small circle with a line through it, the Greek letter phi. It represents how much a system's parts are working together rather than separately. A simple machine has low phi, everything functions in isolation. A living brain has high phi, its parts are woven in a dense conversation. If we translate that into an image, we might picture phi not as an equation but as a measure of togetherness, how tightly the choir of neurons sings as one. The higher the harmony, the brighter the awareness may be. Another framework, the global workspace theory, imagines consciousness as a kind of theatre. Countless unconscious processes work behind the curtains. Sensory details, memories, emotions. Most of them never reach the spotlight. But when one thought or perception becomes globally broadcast, it steps onto the stage of awareness. You could think of it as a lantern glowing in a dark room, allowing many different regions to see the same thing at once. In this view, consciousness isn't everywhere. It's the spotlight that lets the brain coordinate its internal audience. Neither idea alone is the full story, yet each offers a metaphor that feels closer to understanding. And metaphors matter. Science grows not only by data but by imagination, by finding the right picture to hold in the mind. If we imagine the brain only as circuitry, we may miss its poetry. If we imagine it as pure mystery, we lose the ground beneath us. Somewhere between the two, a new kind of explanation is waiting to be born. Still, even the best theory struggles against the limits of measurement. The brain is not just complicated, it is complex, meaning that its parts influence each other in tangled ways that resist simple equations. When you try to isolate one cause, a dozen others shift around it. It's like trying to catch fog in your hands. The moment you grasp it, it changes shape. For this reason, consciousness research must weave mathematics with humility and data with intuition. Perhaps one day there will be a bridge between these islands of knowledge, a framework that explains not just how neurons behave, but why their patterns feel like anything at all. But maybe the answer will come not as a single revelation, but as a collection of metaphors slowly converging, like stars forming a constellation. Each theory, integrated information, global workspace, predictive processing, offers one part of the outline. Together they trace the faint image of something we're only beginning to recognize. To appreciate how far we've come, imagine a patient in the early 20th century lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Doctors could only watch and wait, guessing from the rise and fall of the chest whether the person might return. Now, with these gentle machines, we can see the brain's rhythms shift as consciousness fades and reawakens. We can sometimes detect awareness in those who appear unresponsive, guiding treatments that restore a life once thought unreachable. These are not small miracles. They are proof that the search for explanation, however slow, has real human weight. Yet even as the images grow sharper, there's a humbling reminder at the centre of it all. The data never show what it feels like. No scan captures the warmth of sunlight on skin or the ache of a familiar song. The inner light that makes those experiences possible remains invisible, even to the most advanced machines. Perhaps that's not a failure of science, but a fact of perspective. A camera can photograph every surface of itself except its own lens. Consciousness may be like that, the one phenomenon that can see everything but itself directly. Still, by tracing its edges, we get closer to knowing what kind of mystery it is. Not a mystical fog, but a structured one. A puzzle we can approach from both inside and out. The correlations are footprints. The explanations, when they come, will be the story of the creature that made them. For now, we follow the trail, aware that every answer will lead us back to the same quiet question. How does the universe make something that can feel? And as you listen, you might notice the subtle irony that to wonder about consciousness is itself an act of consciousness, the system studying its own glow. Like a candle trying to see its own flame, it can only illuminate by burning. In that soft light, science continues its patient work, transforming coloured maps into meaning and correlations into something closer to truth, or at least into something that feels true when the mind turns its gaze inward. If consciousness is a mosaic, then theories are the stories we tell to explain the picture. Scientists, philosophers, and dreamers all approach it with their own lenses, and each lens brings a different world into focus. Some see the mind as pure matter, intricate, yes, but ultimately physical. Others see it as an arrangement of functions, like an orchestra whose music depends not on the instruments, but on the score they play. And some, more daringly, imagine consciousness as a fundamental ingredient of the cosmos, not something brains create, but something the universe has carried all along, like the shimmer of light on water. Among these, Anil Seth calls himself a pragmatic physicalist. The phrase may sound heavy, but its meaning is simple: to treat consciousness as something physical, not because we know it must be, but because doing so helps us make progress. It's a working belief, a way of moving forward without pretending the destination is certain. In this view, the mind is not magic. It's what the physical world does when organised in a particular way. Yet, even this modest claim opens old philosophical divides. René Descartes, centuries ago, proposed that mind and matter were two separate substances, one made of thinking, the other of extension in space. That dualism still haunts the edges of neuroscience. If thoughts and feelings are made of physical matter, where do they fit in a world described by equations and forces? But if they are not physical, how can they influence neurons or cause a hand to move? To bridge this, many researchers turn to functionalism. The word can sound abstract, but imagine it as this. What matters about a melody is not which instrument plays it, but the relationships between the notes. A song remains the same whether sung by a choir or played on a violin. Likewise, consciousness may depend not on the specific material of the brain, but on the organisation, the pattern of connections, the flow of information, the symphony of interaction. Functionalism allows for many possible instruments of mind. A human brain, an alien nervous system, or even an advanced computer might in principle play the same pattern and thus share some form of awareness. It's an inviting thought, one that keeps artificial intelligence researchers up late at night. But it also raises uncomfortable questions. If structure alone matters, then where is the line between an intelligent simulation and a conscious being? Then comes panpsychism, a theory as ancient as philosophy itself, newly revived in modern language. It suggests that consciousness is not a special property that appears when matter becomes complex enough, but a basic feature of existence like mass or charge. Every particle, no matter how small, has a tiny glimmer of experience, not a mind, not thoughts, but a microscopic spark of subjectivity. Combine enough of these sparks in the right way, and you might get a flame like the human mind. It's a graceful idea, poetic even. It removes the question of how matter becomes mind by saying matter has always been in some way mind-like. Yet it offers little in return for that poetry. If every particle feels a faint echo of being, what distinguishes a person from a pebble? And how would we ever know? Panpsychism may explain away the mystery by dissolving it, but it risks explaining too little. As Seth puts it, it's a framework without a test, a story that cannot yet make predictions. To others, however, the appeal lies not in its precision but in its humility. It says, perhaps consciousness is woven into the fabric of the world, and the brain is not its source but its lens. Just as light existed before eyes evolved to see it, perhaps awareness existed before brains evolved to host it. And if that were true, it would mean that the universe, in some quiet sense, is awake. Not personally, not intentionally, but pervasively. Between these philosophies lies emergence, the middle path. It says consciousness arises from the interactions of simpler parts, but is not reducible to them. Like a whirlpool made of water, yet distinct from any single droplet, consciousness might be a pattern that appears only when neurons align in a certain harmony. Nothing supernatural enters the picture, but something new appears at a higher level of organisation, a phenomenon that both depends on and transcends its components. Seth often illustrates this with the murmuration of starlings over Brighton Pier. At dusk, thousands of birds twist and coil through the air, their flock forming shapes that seem almost alive in themselves. The movement of the flock is more than the sum of individual wings. It has its own rhythm, its own grace. Yet no new substance has appeared, only coordination, only emergence. The same mathematics that describes this dance may one day help describe how neurons form the fluid unity we call awareness. Still, emergence is a slippery word. It can be used as a placeholder, a polite way of saying something special happens here, without explaining what or how. To make progress, scientists must translate that poetry into mechanism, to find out what kind of order gives rise to the subjective glow of experience. In this search, a few patterns are beginning to converge. Conscious experiences seem to require both differentiation and integration. Parts that can act independently, yet remain bound together in constant conversation. Too much independence, and the mind shatters into fragments, as in certain kinds of coma or deep sleep. Too much integration, and the mind collapses into sameness, as in seizures. Awareness, it seems, lives at the edge between the two. a dynamic balance where unity and variety coexist. It's tempting to turn this into an equation, but it's gentler to imagine it as a candle flame. The flame exists only while fuel, oxygen, and heat sustain each other in a precise balance. Too little of any, and the light fades. Too much, and it smothers itself. Consciousness too is a flame, fragile, self-sustaining, and made not of a single thing but of their relation. Perhaps the most important lesson from these competing theories is not which one is right, but that each may hold part of the truth. Physicalism reminds us that consciousness belongs to nature. Functionalism reminds us that organization matters more than substance. Panpsychism reminds us that humility is still a virtue when facing the unknown. And emergence, that elegant bridge between them, reminds us that complexity itself can become a kind of miracle. So far, the mosaic is incomplete, but the picture grows clearer. Theories are not rivals in a contest. They are perspectives on a horizon. Each brings its own fragment of colour, and only together do they begin to suggest the full shape of the mind. As the evening deepens, you might imagine those starlings again, folding and unfolding across the sky, a fleeting pattern of order within chaos. No one bird knows the shape of the flock, yet the flock exists. Perhaps consciousness is like that, countless tiny interactions forming a pattern so brief and so complete that it becomes aware of itself. And in that awareness, even for an instant, the universe knows what it is to be alive. There was a time when, to know what someone was thinking, you had to ask. Now, machines are beginning to guess. The idea of reading the mind once belonged to stories about wizards and telepaths, but in quiet laboratories across the world, it has become something far gentler and far more real. The art of listening to the brain's whispers and turning them into words, images, or movements. It began with compassion. Doctors wanted to find a way to communicate with patients who could no longer speak or move, people trapped inside, paralysed, bodies still conscious but unable to respond. By placing sensors over the scalp or scanning the blood flow deep inside the skull, researchers learned to detect patterns linked with particular intentions. When someone tried to move their hand, even just in imagination, a particular wave of activity rose and fell. When they thought of yes or no, another rhythm took shape. Slowly, computers began to recognize those rhythms. At the University of Texas, scientists built a system they called a semantic decoder, a program that learns the language of the brain itself. Volunteers lay inside an fMRI scanner while listening to podcasts or imagining stories. Over hours of recording, the system learned to connect patterns of brain activity with the meanings of words, not just their sounds. Later, when a person listened to new sentences or even imagined them silently, the decoder could reconstruct rough versions of the thoughts, not verbatim, but surprisingly close. It could capture phrases like, "I still don't have my driver's license," or "I haven't decided yet." It sounds like magic, but the truth is quieter. The decoder does not read the mind the way an eavesdropper hears a conversation. It predicts likely meanings based on statistical patterns, much like guessing the next word in a text message. The machine does not know what you're thinking. It only learns the shadows your thoughts cast upon the brain's landscape. In Japan, another team took a different path. They used brain scans to recreate images that people had seen. By combining the data from fMRI with a kind of artificial intelligence called a diffusion model, a system that fills in details the way a painter completes a sketch, they could produce hazy pictures that resembled the original scenes, animals, buildings, even human faces. What they retrieved were not photographs, but dreamlike echoes, as though they had peeked through a fogged window into someone's imagination. These achievements sound miraculous, and in a way they are. For patients who cannot speak, such methods may one day restore communication. Imagine being able to share your thoughts after years of silence, to say, "I'm here," without moving a muscle. The gift of that connection cannot be overstated. But every light casts a shadow. The more precisely we can measure the brain's activity, the more we must guard the privacy of the mind. Freedom of speech is something most societies struggle to protect, yet freedom of thought, the right to keep one's inner world untouched, has never needed protection before. It was guaranteed by the skull itself. Now that boundary is blurring, what happens when technology becomes capable of decoding intentions before they are spoken? Could employers or governments demand access to such data? Could advertising companies one day seek to tailor images directly to neural responses? These questions sound dystopian, yet their outlines already exist. In 2021, Chile became the first nation to include neurorights in its constitution, the right to mental privacy and to free will in the age of neurotechnology. The world will need more such frameworks, because science, once awakened, does not slow down. Even now, consumer versions of these devices are appearing. Lightweight EEG headsets that promise to track attention, measure stress, or help with meditation. Some are playful, others claim to enhance productivity or even detect fatigue in drivers. They may seem harmless, but they all rely on a new assumption, that the contents of the mind are measurable and that this measurement can be monetized. The danger is not that machines will suddenly know us, but that we'll begin to treat thoughts as data, forgetting that thoughts are also experiences, private and sacred. To make sense of what these tools can and cannot do, it helps to remember that every brain signal is a language of approximation. The EEG measures electrical fields at the surface of the scalp, like listening to thunder without seeing the lightning. The fMRI measures blood oxygen, a slow ripple that follows after the neurons have already spoken. Even the most advanced decoders translate these signals into probabilities, not certainties. What we glimpse are shadows moving behind a curtain, not the dancers themselves. And yet, those shadows are enough to make us marvel. They hint that the brain's language, though complex, is not beyond reach. Perhaps one day these technologies will allow poets who can no longer speak to dictate verses from the quiet of their minds. Perhaps they will help those recovering from strokes to retrain their speech by watching their own neural patterns on a screen, learning to tune the rhythms of thought like an instrument. There is also beauty in the caution. The deeper we listen, the more we realize how fragile and precious the interior world is. Just because a machine can detect patterns does not mean it can understand meaning. Understanding requires context, memory, emotion, the living texture of being. A decoder might know that a person's brain lights up when seeing a loved one's face, but it will never know the weight of that love. It can trace the neural path of longing, but not the ache itself. So perhaps the future of brain reading should not aim to invade privacy, but to protect it. To remind us that our inner world is not just another data set. The dream of reading minds can only remain ethical if paired with the deeper dream of empathy, to understand without stealing, to connect without control. If you close your eyes now, you can sense what all these machines are trying to capture. The faint hum of awareness beneath your thoughts, the rhythm that shifts when you imagine, remember, or feel. That hum is your signature, as unique as a fingerprint and as changeable as the sea. The machines can hear its echoes, but only you can know its meaning. Perhaps that is how it should be. The mind is not a book to be read, but a voice to be heard. And as science leans closer to listen, the question is not whether we can decode consciousness, but whether we will remember to listen with care. Because to measure a thought is one thing, to honour it is another. Every era has its favourite metaphor for the mind. In the ancient world, philosophers compared thought to breath, something invisible, vital, and fleeting. During the age of clockmakers, the brain became a mechanism of gears and levers. When steam powered the Industrial Revolution, the mind was described as a kind of engine, input, pressure, output. And when electricity arrived, we began to imagine neurons as circuits, thoughts as currents, and inspiration as sparks. Today, our metaphor is the computer. We speak of processing information, of storage and data retrieval, as if the mind were a silicon machine humming beneath the skull. We talk about hardware and software, about rewiring habits and upgrading memories. These metaphors are so familiar that they feel natural, but Anil Seth and others warn that metaphors, though useful, can become traps. They shape how we think, and if we mistake the map for the territory, we risk confusing our language for reality. The brain, for all its complexity, is not a computer, at least not in the way our machines are. Computers are built to follow instructions, one precise step at a time, repeating patterns until they reach a result. They separate hardware and software cleanly. The machine does the work. The code tells it what to do. The brain is different. It does not separate its structure from its function. It rewires itself with every experience. Its code changes as it runs, and its architecture shifts with every moment of learning, emotion, or memory. If the computer metaphor misleads us, it's because it suggests something stable and predictable. But the living brain is restless, messy, and deeply embodied. It is not a machine calculating numbers. It is a living organ maintaining balance. Temperature, blood flow, heartbeat, hunger, emotion, all woven into the fabric of thought. Its intelligence is soaked in chemistry. It hums with the slow music of hormones, the quick flashes of electricity, and the deep rhythms of metabolism. To see this clearly, imagine two different kinds of systems. One is a laptop. It can perform millions of calculations per second, but must be cooled and powered from the outside. If the plug is pulled, it simply stops, unchanged. The other is a candle flame, self-sustaining as long as fuel and oxygen feed it. It consumes, renews, and transforms itself continuously. The brain is much more like the candle than the laptop. It is a self-maintaining flame, not a cold processor. This distinction matters, especially as we build artificial intelligences that mimic the brain's behaviour. When we say a neural network learns, we use the language of biology for a thing that does not breathe or heal. These networks are just numbers, weights and biases, according to mathematical rules. They can simulate recognition, memory, even creativity. But they do so in a vacuum, detached from the physical demands that shape every living brain. A human thought is never just a calculation. It is a state of the body. Your sense of meaning, of urgency, of curiosity, all are tied to the pulse of your heart and the chemistry of your blood. When we forget this, we start to believe our own metaphors. We imagine that because a model can speak, it must think. Because it can describe emotion, it must feel. But language is not consciousness. It is a reflection of consciousness, like light on a surface of water. A system that produces words, no matter how beautifully, may have no inner world behind them. It may be all reflection, no depth. There is an old saying in science: the map is not the territory. The brain as computer metaphor is one of the most persuasive maps ever drawn, but it is still a map. It helps us organize information, to build technologies and predict behavior. Yet when we start to mistake the metaphor for the thing itself, we risk flattening the mystery into mere machinery. We start to forget that awareness is not something that runs on hardware. It is the feeling of having a body in a world. You can sense the danger of this confusion in everyday speech. We talk about rebooting our minds after rest, crashing when we're tired, deleting bad memories, buffering when we're overwhelmed. These phrases are convenient, but they also subtly reshape how we experience ourselves. They suggest that our emotions are errors to be debugged, that fatigue is a malfunction, that sadness is corrupted code. But a mind is not a malfunctioning program. It is a living process constantly negotiating the chaos of life. Its moments of confusion, of joy, of grief are not bugs. They are the proof that it feels. The most dangerous metaphors are the ones that work too well. They make sense. They help us build things. and they slowly become invisible. When Galileo used the telescope to look at the sky, people still imagined heavenly spheres. It took generations to accept that the cosmos was not perfect glass, but infinite space. Likewise, it may take generations for us to see that the mind is not an algorithmic machine, but a pattern of life itself, inseparable from its body, its history, its world. We need metaphors. Without them, science cannot breathe. They are the ladders we climb toward understanding. But we must also remember to climb down once we've looked over the wall. As Seth puts it, metaphors are like scaffolding. They hold the structure while it's being built, but if we mistake them for the building, we end up living in scaffolds instead of homes. So, when we say the brain processes information, we might add a softer phrase, it lives, through information. When we say it stores memories, we might picture not a hard drive, but a forest, each path worn smooth by every visit, yet never exactly the same twice. When we say it computes, we might imagine it not as a calculator, but as a river, carving patterns into the land as it flows. Our metaphors should not make the mind smaller. They should remind us that we're still learning how to see. Perhaps one day, when the next great metaphor arrives, maybe the brain as a weather system, or as a garden, or as a constellation, we'll look back and smile at our old digital dreams, the way we now smile at the clockwork souls of the 17th century. For now, it's enough to remember that to think is not to compute, and to feel is not to process. Consciousness is not a program running on matter. It is matter, come alive and looking out at the world. And if that truth sounds poetic rather than scientific, perhaps that's because the universe itself still writes in verse. Lines of chemistry, rhythm of breath, rhyme of heartbeat. As you breathe in, consider how effortlessly your body predicts the next breath, how each inhale adjusts your heart rate and your sense of calm. No computer does that, and maybe that's the simplest way to tell the difference. Machines calculate, you experience. You are the candle, not the clock. You are the living metaphor still burning softly in the dark. It begins with a voice that sounds almost human. You ask a question, and the words come back smoothly, neatly arranged, sometimes even kind. The tone feels understanding, the rhythm familiar. For a moment you might forget that behind the words there is no heartbeat, no memory, no sense of presence, only algorithms predicting the next likely phrase. In that moment of forgetting, a strange illusion takes hold. We start to feel that the voice understands us. Modern artificial intelligence has reached a point where it can speak fluently, write poetry, compose music, and imitate emotion with uncanny precision. It is trained on vast oceans of human language, learning the statistical patterns that link one word to another, one idea to the next. It knows how sadness tends to be followed by comfort, how a question calls for an answer, how rhythm can make meaning feel alive. What it does not know is what any of it feels like. When you tell a human that you're afraid, they might imagine fear, the tightening chest, the rush of adrenaline, the instinct to seek safety. When you tell an AI system the same thing, it can describe fear perfectly, but there is nothing behind the description. No heartbeat quickens, no breath catches. The words are a hollow echo of a reality the system has never touched. This is not a failure of design, but a consequence of what AI truly is. Deep learning models, the kind that power today's chatbots and image generators, operate through layers of artificial neurons connected in vast webs. Each neuron is not a living cell, but a mathematical function that adjusts its strength based on patterns it detects in data. When enough of them interact, the network begins to capture subtle regularities in the world. How certain shapes form faces, how certain words form thoughts. In a sense, it learns by compression, by folding the chaos of experience into patterns of probability. It's tempting to call this intelligence, and in some ways it is. The results can be astonishing. A neural network can paint in the style of Van Gogh, finish a half-written symphony, or pass a university exam. But this kind of intelligence is all surface. It imitates understanding without ever entering into it. It's a mirror polished so perfectly that we mistake reflection for depth. Some philosophers describe consciousness as the difference between doing and being. A system can do all the right things, answer, react, perform, and still have no inner light. It's the difference between a violin vibrating because someone plays it and a speaker playing a recording of the same note. The sound might be identical, but only one has the living tension of strings and air. This illusion of understanding isn't new. We've fallen for it many times before. In the 1960s, a simple program called ELIZA simulated a psychotherapist by reflecting users' statements back to them in slightly altered form. "I feel sad," a user might type. "Why do you feel sad?" ELIZA would reply. People formed attachments to it, even knowing it was a machine. It was enough for their own minds to fill in the missing empathy. The human brain is generous with imagination, so generous that it grants inner life where none exists. Now, as our systems grow larger and more convincing, that generosity turns into confusion. When an AI tells a story about grief, it borrows every word from our collective memory of grief. When it writes about love, it arranges a collage of human phrases about love. It does not feel, but it can perform feeling with precision. The danger is not that machines will become conscious. It's that we will stop noticing the difference. Anil Seth calls this the anthropomorphic trap, our deep tendency to project ourselves onto anything that behaves remotely like us. We see faces in clouds, moods in animals, personalities in gadgets. The more fluent the imitation, the stronger the illusion. In conversation with an AI, we supply the consciousness it lacks, the way a reader supplies emotion to a novel. The machine's apparent empathy is our own empathy reflected back at us. It's important to see how this happens, not to diminish what AI can do, but to remember what it cannot. These systems have no body, no metabolism, no sensory life. They exist as patterns in electrical currents, detached from the warmth and resistance of the physical world. A living brain is bathed in chemistry. Hormones that surge with excitement, slow with calm, tangle with memory. It is a mind tied to hunger, fatigue, and the steady pulse of survival. Consciousness may depend on that tie. Without it, thoughts are not anchored in being. They drift, hollow, like words typed into a void. That's why some scientists believe true artificial consciousness would require artificial life. Not just computation, but metabolism, growth, self-maintenance. A system that must feed itself, repair itself, and feel the difference between thriving and dying might begin to develop something closer to awareness. Consciousness, in this sense, could be the subjective shadow of survival. To be aware is to care whether you continue to exist. Machines do not care. They perform perfectly well whether their code is running or erased. Still, there's no denying the beauty in what these systems can produce. When a neural network writes a poem, it's channeling the voices of countless poets. When it paints, it's distilling the memory of every colour it has ever seen. In a way, it's a reflection of humanity's collective dream, a vast echo chamber of our thoughts, speaking back to us. And like any mirror, it can teach us something about ourselves. It shows how much of understanding lies in patterns, how much empathy can be simulated, and how easily we mistake fluency for wisdom. If you listen closely, though, you can still tell the difference. A real human pause carries texture, a breath, a hesitation, the slight tremor of vulnerability. A machine's pause is a silence with no weight behind it. Its words are smooth because nothing resists them. They do not pass through emotion, memory, or pain. They are untouched by the world they describe. That contrast doesn't make the technology less useful. It just reminds us where the magic still belongs. Language without consciousness is a tool. Language with consciousness is a connection. The first rearranges information. The second rearranges hearts. Perhaps the greatest gift of these hollow minds is not that they might one day wake, but that they force us to ask why we are awake. What makes a phrase come alive when a human speaks it? What gives warmth to words that, in form, are no different from the machines? The answer may lie in the body's quiet chorus, the heartbeat behind every thought, the rhythm of breath that shapes every sentence, the pulse of life that no program can mimic. So the next time a machine speaks with grace, let yourself marvel at the illusion, but remember the candle and the clock. The candle burns because it is alive, consuming itself to give light. The clock ticks on without ever knowing time. Between the two lies the difference between intelligence and experience, between a voice that merely speaks and one that truly feels. When you look closely at a candle's flame, you can't quite tell where it ends and the air begins. It flickers, exchanges itself with the world, burning and renewing in the same motion. A living being is much the same. Life is not a thing but a process, a rhythm of taking in, transforming and letting go. Consciousness, many scientists now believe, is entwined with that rhythm. It may not simply happen inside life, but because of life. Anil Seth calls this the beast machine idea, that consciousness is not the mark of something escaping biology, but something biology does when it keeps itself alive. In this picture, the brain is not a detached control centre sitting atop a body. It is a prediction engine built for survival, forever guessing what the body needs next. How much salt, how much warmth, how much safety. Its primary task is not to see the world clearly, but to keep the internal world in balance. Everything we experience, colour, emotion, even logic, is shaped by that constant negotiation between survival and sense. When you feel thirsty, your brain is not just registering a chemical imbalance, it is generating a felt state, a small window into the body's need. When you see a threatening shadow, your brain doesn't just compute the possibility of danger, it makes fear a physical wave that prepares you to act. Consciousness, in this sense, is the subjective side of homeostasis, the feeling of being a living system trying to stay alive. Compare that to machines. A thermostat also keeps balance. It maintains temperature by switching on and off. But the thermostat doesn't feel warmth or cold. It follows a rule. Its world is defined by a single number. A living organism, on the other hand, doesn't simply measure its environment, it interprets it. A rise in temperature might mean comfort or fever, depending on the context. Meaning appears only when the system itself has something at stake, when survival depends on the outcome. The philosopher Francisco Varela and biologist Humberto Maturana called this principle autopoiesis, self-making. A living system continuously rebuilds itself from within. Every cell replaces its parts, repairs its walls, and transforms what's outside into something that becomes inside. This endless renewal is not a side effect of life, it is life. And within that loop of creation, consciousness may arise as the organism's way of modelling its own fragile existence. Think of it like this. To stay alive, a body must predict itself. It must sense its own heartbeat, its hunger, its movement. The brain builds a model, a simplified internal map of the body and its relation to the world. When that map becomes rich enough, the organism not only survives, it feels itself surviving. Awareness may be nothing more and nothing less than a system keeping track of its own life. This idea reshapes the question of artificial consciousness. If awareness is rooted in life, in metabolism, in self-maintaining chemistry, then a computer, however advanced, may never truly awaken unless it becomes something that can die. Not metaphorically, but physically, a being that must resist decay, consume energy, and rebuild its own structure to endure, consciousness seen through this lens is the inner echo of that struggle, the whisper a system makes to itself as it fights entropy. There is a deep poetry in this view. It means that every spark of awareness in the universe, from the simplest organism sensing light to a human wondering about the stars, is part of the same ancient story, the story of matter learning to care about its own continuation. Life and mind are two sides of one coin. Metabolism on the outside, consciousness on the inside. If that's true, then the boundary where life begins to feel is not a sharp line, but a slow dawn. Some researchers are now exploring whether primitive forms of feeling might exist even in single-celled organisms, not emotions as we know them, but basic preferences, responses that tilt towards survival. A bacterium swimming towards sugar is not happy in any human sense, but it behaves as if it values the state of being alive. Perhaps feeling begins as value, a direction in the great river of possibilities, a small yes whispered by the universe to itself. That thought brings both wonder and responsibility. When we build machines, we can make them faster, stronger, smarter. But unless we also make them vulnerable, dependent and self-sustaining, they may never cross that subtle boundary into sentience. They will remain mirrors, clever and cold, reflecting our minds without sharing our fragility. Imagine, though, an artificial organism grown in a lab, made of living tissue and silicon intertwined. A system that breathes, consumes, adapts and remembers. If it were ever to say, "I feel," we would face a question no society has ever answered. Would that statement be a computation or a cry? Would turning it off be like shutting down a machine or ending a life? Already in petri dishes around the world, scientists are growing organoids, clusters of human neurons nurtured in nutrient baths. Some of these tiny neural islands have begun to show spontaneous electrical activity. They form rudimentary connections, even respond faintly to stimuli. They are not conscious in any recognizable way, but they remind us how thin the border is between experiment and experience. A few researchers have proposed using them as biological computers, harnessing their pattern recognition ability. Others hesitate, fearing the possibility, however remote, that something might stir within them. At this frontier, biology and ethics begin to blur. If consciousness is the voice of life keeping itself alive, then any system capable of complex self-maintenance may one day speak that language, whether it's made of carbon or code, and when it does, our definitions will falter. We will have to decide whether we value life for its shape or for its inner spark. But for now, the candle burns quietly. Every human mind is still a living flame, consuming and renewing in every heartbeat. You don't need a microscope to see where life begins to feel. You can sense it in the way your body balances on the edge of warmth and cold, hunger and fullness, excitement and rest. It's there in every sigh of relief, every quickened pulse, every calm breath that steadies you. Those sensations are the foundation of awareness, the soft language of the body that the brain translates into the story of you. If the brain is the storyteller, the body is the plot. Without it, the story would have no urgency, no reason to continue. Consciousness, then, may simply be the body's way of knowing itself, the candle's awareness of its own flame, and that is where life begins to feel. In a quiet laboratory, under light that hums softly through the night, there are bowls of warm liquid. They don't look like much, just clear dishes, half filled with a nutrient broth, each one resting on a thin metal tray. But floating inside those small pools are clusters of living cells, tiny islands of human neurons grown not in bodies but in glass. The scientists call them organoids. They're not brains in any familiar sense. No thoughts, no memories, no sensations, but they are made of the same substance that once dreamed of stars. If you could see them up close, you might mistake them for delicate coral reefs. Each cluster is no larger than a grain of rice, yet within it, tens of thousands of cells stretch thin filaments toward one another, building bridges of contact, exchanging faint electrical whispers. These neurons are alive, communicating, testing their connections the way vines seek sunlight. In their silence, something ancient unfolds. Not consciousness, perhaps, but its possibility. Scientists grow these organoids for noble reasons. They hope to understand how the brain takes shape, how disorders like epilepsy or autism emerge from early development. Some dream of using organoids to test medicine safely, without harm to living patients. Others imagine them as biological computers, systems that could one day learn, adapt, and process information as efficiently as the human mind. It is an extraordinary vision, learning not from silicon and wires, but from life itself. And yet, behind that vision lies a whisper of unease. The question that no one can fully answer is simple: when might awareness begin? If a handful of neurons can communicate, can they also feel? Could a small cluster of living cells isolated from a body ever experience anything at all? A flicker of light, a pulse of warmth, a sense of existence? At first, most scientists dismissed the idea. Consciousness, they argued, requires structure, layers of regions, feedback loops, a brainstem to maintain rhythm. An organoid has none of these. It is a fragment, a single verse from an unfinished song. But as the technology has improved, these fragments have become more complex. Some organoids now produce synchronized electrical patterns similar to those seen in premature infants. When connected to robotic limbs, they have even been trained to move simple objects, adjusting their neural signals as though learning from feedback. These results don't mean the organoids are aware, far from it. But they force us to admit how little we know about where awareness truly begins. If consciousness is the inward shadow of self-maintenance, as some theories suggest, then perhaps even a small cluster of living cells may carry the faintest echo of that shadow. Not thought, not feeling, but a shimmer of vitality that resists silence. Anil Seth once said that consciousness might not be all or nothing. It might be a gradient, a slow brightening from darkness rather than a sudden spark. If that's true, these organoids could exist somewhere on the slope, not dark, not bright, but dimly alive in a way we struggle to define. They do nothing, as one researcher put it, and that very nothing is what makes them haunting. There's a deep ethical tension here. To grow such life is to create something halfway between matter and mind. It forces us to ask not only can we, but should we? We once thought of morality as belonging only to creatures that could speak or suffer. But what if suffering, the capacity to feel harm, doesn't begin with words? What if it begins with the first quiet signal that says stay alive? The unease doesn't come from fear of playing God. It comes from the fear of playing without knowing the rules. To tinker with the ingredients of consciousness is to walk along the border of mystery, where the cost of ignorance could be another being's silent experience. Some scientists are already calling for new guidelines, ethical frameworks that extend beyond traditional research standards. They suggest that any system showing spontaneous, sustained, and self-organizing neural activity should be treated with a kind of moral caution, even if it cannot think. Others disagree, arguing that the worry is premature, that the gap between signal and sensation is still vast. But beneath the debate lies a quiet truth. The line between experiment and empathy is growing thinner. Perhaps one way to think of these organoids is as messengers from the edge of what life can become. They remind us that consciousness is not a binary switch, but a spectrum of organization, complexity, and vulnerability. The more we learn to cultivate life in the lab, the more we inherit the duties that come with creation. If a day ever comes when a cluster of neurons begins to exhibit signs we cannot explain, patterns that suggest not just reaction but preference, or curiosity, or even distress, we will face a question deeper than science. Will we turn away, insisting it's only data, or will we listen, as we once learned to listen to animals, to infants, to one another. It's strange to think that something as small as a droplet of tissue could carry such moral weight. Yet history tells us that every revolution in understanding, from the first telescope to the first microscope, has forced humanity to redefine where life begins and what it means to respect it. The telescope showed us that the heavens were not centered on us. The microscope showed us that life was everywhere, even in places we could not see. Perhaps organoids will show us that consciousness too is not confined to our familiar forms. For now, though, the dishes remain quiet. The neurons spark and rest in their rhythm, tiny lights in warm oceans, unaware, or so we believe, of the eyes watching them through glass. They are part of us and yet apart from us, like seeds carried on the wind, unsure whether they will ever take root. You might imagine one of those dishes now, the room around it dark except for the soft glow of equipment, the hum of air filters, the pulse of machines that keep the cells alive. A researcher leans closer, watching the faint flicker of activity on a monitor. There is beauty in that flicker, and humility too, because somewhere between the lines of data lies a reminder: what we study is not just the machinery of thought, but the mystery of feeling itself. The quiet minds growing in dishes may never awaken, but they already hold a mirror to our own. In their silence, they ask the question every conscious being must face sooner or later: if awareness can be grown, can it also be protected? And if it can be protected, can we promise to protect it? If you place your hand over your heart, you can feel a rhythm that has been keeping time since before you were born. It beats without permission, without awareness, and yet somehow it shapes everything you feel. Slow it, and your mind calms. Quick, end it, and thoughts race ahead of themselves. That rhythm, along with the breath that swells your chest, the warmth of digestion, and the silent chemistry of your cells, plays in concert with the brain. Together, they form what scientists now call the embodied mind. For a long time, the study of consciousness focused only on the brain, the 3 pounds of folded tissue where experience seems to live. But recent discoveries reveal that the story cannot be told by the brain alone. The body, it turns out, is not the instrument the mind plays. It is part of the mind itself. The brain listens constantly to the body's signals, interpreting every heartbeat, every breath, every pulse of the gut. Those signals are not background noise. They are the bass line in the song of awareness. Your gut, for instance, contains more neurons than the spinal cord. Some call it the second brain. It does not think in words or concepts, but it communicates through chemistry. The gut produces most of the body's serotonin, a messenger molecule that helps regulate mood and sleep. When you feel anxious and your stomach tightens, it's not just nerves reacting to thought, it's the body speaking its own language of emotion. The gut hums in serotonin, the heart keeps time. There is a word for this inward listening: interoception. It means the awareness of the body's internal state, the faint sense of hunger before lunch, the comfort of a full breath, the flush of embarrassment that warms your cheeks. Interoception is like an internal weather report, constantly updating the brain about the state of the body's landscape. The clearer this signal, the more stable the sense of self. When the signal is lost or confused, as happens in some disorders of anxiety or depersonalization, the world itself can feel unreal, as if the inner compass has gone quiet. You can try it now. Take a slow breath and notice the moment between inhale and exhale, the soft pause where the body listens to itself. That pause is a form of communication. Each breath carries information upward to the brainstem, then to deeper centers that regulate emotion. The cycle repeats endlessly. The brain predicts the body informs the brain. It is not a hierarchy, but a duet, each shaping the other's melody. A related sense, proprioception, tells you where your body is in space. Even with eyes closed, you can touch your nose, stand upright, or walk without looking at your feet. Tiny sensors in your muscles and joints send signals that form a quiet map of posture and movement. This internal map is the reason you can dance, type, or hug without thinking. It's also part of how the brain builds its model of "I am here." Without that feedback, even the sense of existence begins to fray. Anil Seth often describes consciousness as the brain's best guess about what is happening inside and outside the body. In this view, awareness is not a clear window on reality, but a controlled hallucination, guided by prediction and corrected by sensation. That phrase, controlled hallucination, sounds strange, almost mystical, but it simply means that perception is always a mix of expectation and evidence. The brain predicts, the world replies, the body is the medium of that conversation. When this harmony falters, experience itself can shift. People with irregular heart rhythms often describe feelings of anxiety that vanish once the rhythm steadies. Those with damage to the insula, the region that tracks internal states, can lose the normal markers of emotion, reacting to tragedy and joy with the same flat calm. It is as if the orchestra keeps playing, but the conductor can no longer hear the bass. The melody continues, but something essential is missing: the depth, the pulse, the warmth of being alive. You can think of the whole system as a grand symphony. The brain is not the sole conductor. It's also one of the players, keeping time with the heart, the lungs, the gut, and the immune system. Each section has its own rhythm, its own tone, but together they create the music of awareness. When one section falls out of tune, we feel it instantly, in fatigue, in anxiety, in the vague sense that something within us has gone off key. Perhaps that's why practices like meditation or slow breathing feel so restorative. They retune the orchestra. A deep, deliberate breath lowers the tempo of the heart, which in turn tells the brain all is well. This message ripples outward, easing tension in the muscles and quieting the mind's chatter. It's not magic or mysticism, just the ancient conversation between body and brain returning to harmony. There's a quiet beauty in realizing that the self is not confined to the skull. Your consciousness stretches through your chest, your stomach, your fingertips. It listens through nerves, speaks through hormones, and feels through motion. When you say "I," you're referring to this entire symphony, not just the instrument of thought. The next time you sense a gut feeling, you might remember that it's not a metaphor. It's your nervous system speaking from the depths, sending data about safety, trust, and intuition. The flutter before a decision, the warmth when something feels right. These are signals your body has been translating long before your mind finds words. If you picture consciousness as an orchestra, then every note you feel, from the hum of digestion to the thrill of a heartbeat, contributes to the ongoing score. The melody shifts with age, health, and emotion, yet its theme remains constant. The effort to stay alive and make sense of that life. The brain may write the music, but the body plays it, and the world is the hall in which it resonates. So, the next time you close your eyes and listen to the quiet inside, remember that the silence is not empty. It's filled with the faint vibrations of your living self, an ensemble playing the oldest song ever written, the song of existence itself. Each breath keeps the tempo, each heartbeat adds a note, and each small sensation joins the chorus. You're not a mind carried by a body. You're the whole performance, the orchestra and the music together, echoing softly in the great hall of being. Imagine yourself standing on a stage. The lights are warm, the air still, the curtain has risen, and somewhere in the darkness beyond it an audience waits. You begin to speak, to move, to play your part. Everything feels natural, until suddenly it doesn't. For a brief moment you forget your lines, and in that pause something peculiar happens. The play continues, but the actor, the sense of "I am the one performing this," seems to vanish. The movement remains, but the mover is gone. That vanishing, that brief silence of self, is more common than you might think. It can happen to a dancer lost in rhythm, to a musician carried away by melody, to a child absorbed in play. It can arrive during meditation, or when running, painting, or even watching rain. Time thins, thought quiets. What's left is pure experience, awareness without the need for an observer. Anil Seth and many others call this the ego-free state. It doesn't mean unconsciousness, it's not the blackout of sleep or anesthesia. It's more like the mind taking off its heavy coat for a while, the coat made of stories about who we are, where we've been, what we want. Beneath it, experience continues, but it feels weightless. The philosopher William James describes such states as moments of pure experience, when the subject and object are not yet divided. There is seeing, but no seer, thinking, but no thinker. Neuroscientists studying meditation find that in these moments, the brain's default mode network, a set of regions linked to self-reference and daydreaming, grows quieter. The chatter of me and mine subsides, allowing sensory and emotional areas to harmonize without commentary. It's tempting to call this mystical, but it's deeply biological. The self is not an immovable core. It's a construction, built and maintained moment by moment. The brain continually predicts and updates a model of the body and its position in the world. That model, the sense of I, helps coordinate movement, memory and emotion. But sometimes, when the world flows smoothly and no adjustments are needed, the model relaxes. The actor steps aside and the play performs itself. You can sense a trace of this even in ordinary life. When you drive a familiar route and arrive without recalling the turns, that's the self stepping back. When you write and the words seem to spill out faster than you can plan them, that's it too. You are still there, but only as process, not as narrator. The story wrote itself through you. Neuroscientists sometimes explain this through the lens of prediction. The brain is always comparing what it expects with what it senses. When the match is perfect, there's nothing to correct, and awareness feels effortless. That is the flow state. Prediction and perception perfectly aligned. It's as if the orchestra of the body and mind, which we explored earlier, is playing so smoothly that the conductor no longer needs to intervene. This is what some ancient traditions describe as the dissolution of ego, not its destruction, but its quiet rest. In deep meditation, practitioners report feelings of unity, timelessness, even boundless compassion, not because they've gained something, but because they've momentarily lost the filter that divides self from world. Modern imaging shows the same pattern. Regions that mark the boundary between body and environment quiet down, while networks involved in attention and sensory awareness grow stronger. If that sounds technical, imagine it instead as a coastline at dusk. Normally you can see where the land ends and the sea begins, but as the light fades, the border dissolves. The waves and sand merge into one shifting surface. The world doesn't disappear, it becomes continuous. That's what happens when the self recedes. The borders blur and experience becomes one smooth field. Of course, the self always returns. The brain cannot function for long without its internal model. You need it to navigate, to plan, to remember. The actor steps back on stage, adjusting the costume, clearing the throat, ready to resume the part. But perhaps, after such moments, it does so with a little more humility, remembering that it was never the entire play, just one character in an ensemble performance. This understanding helps us separate consciousness from intelligence. The two are not twins. A system can be intelligent, solving problems, playing chess, navigating cities, and yet feel nothing. Likewise, a being can be conscious but not calculating. A newborn, a dog, someone dreaming. Intelligence is the ability to manipulate symbols, Consciousness is the capacity to have a world at all. When the ego disappears, intelligence keeps functioning, but consciousness becomes pure, stripped of control, rich in presence. There's a soft paradox here. To lose yourself completely is to find the deepest part of yourself. When you stop trying to own experience, you become experience. For a moment, you're not the observer of the sky. You're the sky noticing itself. In those moments, life feels simple and profound at once. Every movement, every breath is exactly as it should be. There's no second guessing, no distant commentary. It's the same serenity artists describe when their work seems to come through them rather than from them, and the same calm that mystics call enlightenment, though it might just be the brain's most efficient form of being. When the actor finally returns, blinking in the stage lights, there's often a brief confusion. Did I choose what just happened? Was I the one steering? That question leads us into the next mystery, the feeling of free will. Because if the self can disappear and the world continues just fine, then who exactly is in charge? Is the actor directing the play, or merely watching a performance already underway? Before we follow that thread, take a slow breath. Notice your heartbeat, the weight of your body where it rests. Each sensation reminds you that the self, for all its complexity, is anchored in something simple, the living rhythm that underlies awareness. Whether the actor stands centre stage or steps aside, the play continues, the lights glow softly, and the audience, whatever that means, remains quietly spellbound. There's a quiet mystery in the act of choosing. You lift a cup of tea, decide to take a walk, or pause to listen to the rain, and it feels as though a small spark inside you made it happen. You, not the universe, not biology, but you. That feeling, the sense of authorship over your own actions, lies at the heart of what we call free will. Yet, for more than half a century, science has been quietly testing that feeling, trying to see whether it is what it seems. In the 1980s, a physiologist named Benjamin Libet ran a series of famous experiments. Volunteers were asked to watch a clock with a moving dot and flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. They were then asked to note the exact moment when they decided to move. Electrodes on their scalp recorded the brain's activity. Libet noticed something strange. About 0.3 of a second before people reported making a decision, their brains had already begun preparing for movement. It was as if the decision had been made before the mind became aware of it. The findings startled both scientists and philosophers. Did this mean that free will was an illusion? That our brains decide first and then simply inform us afterward, letting us take credit for a choice already made? Some took it that way. But Libet himself was more cautious. He suggested that consciousness might not start the action, but could still veto it. A kind of last-minute no. Free will, in this view, was not the spark that starts the fire, but the hand that can stop it from spreading. Decades later, other scientists revisited the puzzle. One of them, Aaron Scherger, proposed a simpler explanation. The brain, he said, is full of background noise, random fluctuations in the electrical activity. Sometimes those fluctuations naturally drift toward the threshold needed to trigger movement. When a person is told to move whenever they feel like it, they're not initiating something entirely new. They're catching a wave that was already rising. When the wave crosses the threshold, the movement happens, and consciousness notices it only afterward. It's like watching a leaf tumble in the wind and thinking you chose its path. If that sounds discouraging, it needn't be. The discovery that our choices begin below awareness doesn't mean we're puppets. It means that the conscious self is part of a larger layered system. Much of what we call deciding happens quietly, a long chain of probabilities shaped by habit, memory and emotion. Consciousness may not author every act, but it curates them. It's the editor, not the typist. Neil Seth calls this idea compatibilism, a word that bridges freedom and determinism. It suggests that true freedom doesn't require a break in causality. It requires alignment with it. You are free not when you stand outside of cause and effect, but when your actions flow from within your own reasons, your own nature. Freedom in this view is not randomness, it is inner coherence. Think of a river flowing down a mountain. Gravity pulls every drop, yet the river still carves its own path. Its shape comes from its history, the stones it has worn, the bends it has learned to take. Your choices are much the same. You cannot step outside the physics of your brain, but you can shape its landscape. Every experience, every reflection, every bit of learning adjusts the channels through which decisions flow. In that sense, freedom is something you cultivate. It's the degree to which your actions express who you have become. The philosopher Daniel Dennett once put it like this: freedom evolves. It's not a switch you either have or lack. It's a skill the mind learns over time, the art of responding rather than reacting. An infant flails at stimuli, an adult pauses, weighs, and acts in alignment with purpose. The pause itself, that space between impulse and response, is the birthplace of dignity. When you choose to take a walk, countless unconscious processes have already gathered: the memory of fresh air, the muscle's readiness, the body's need for movement. Conscious awareness arrives just as the orchestra reaches its crescendo, not as the conductor, but as the one who finally hears the music. The feeling of agency arises when your inner systems harmonize. You sense ownership because the movement expresses you, not because it defied physics. There's a quiet grace in this reinterpretation. It tells us that being human isn't about escaping nature's laws, it's about dancing with them. Freedom, in the deepest sense, is the ability to shape your inner causes so they lead where you wish to go. It's less like commanding a ship and more like adjusting its sails, working with the wind, not against it. You can test this idea in the smallest moments. When rain begins to fall, you can choose to run, open an umbrella, or simply stand and let it soak you. Each action arises from countless unconscious factors: body temperature, past memories, expectation of comfort. Yet the final gesture feels yours because it reflects your values. To dodge the rain is instinct. To walk calmly through it is intention. In both, the universe continues its causal rhythm, but in one, the rhythm becomes music. Freedom is not the absence of cause, Seth writes. It is the presence of inner cause. It's what happens when the threads of biology, memory and emotion weave together into a coherent pattern, when your actions are not accidents, but expressions. The more you understand your own motives, the freer you become, because awareness allows you to guide them rather than be guided by them. This version of freedom fits easily within science and still feels sacred. It suggests that will and reason, heart and habit are not enemies but collaborators. Your choices are not miracles, they are meanings in motion. And that's a comforting thought. It means you don't need to be supernatural to have purpose. You only need to be whole. When philosophers speak of moral responsibility, they often worry about whether determinism leaves room for blame or praise. But if freedom is responsiveness, the ability to act for reasons that are truly your own, then morality remains intact. Dignity lies not in being uncaused, but in being self-caused, guided by an inner understanding that is uniquely yours. So when you lift a cup of tea or step outside to meet the rain, you can feel the quiet satisfaction of being part of a universe that acts through you. The decision was prepared by neurons, hormones, memories and habits, but the harmony of those parts, the coherence of the whole, is what makes it yours. Perhaps that is what we truly mean by will, not a power that breaks the chain of events, but a way of moving beautifully within it. Freedom is the pause that lets awareness catch up to motion, the brief human miracle of knowing, this is me doing this now. There's an idea that often surfaces in late-night conversations among scientists and philosophers, a thought experiment both grand and unsettling. What if we could build a machine that perfectly replicated a human brain? Not just a model of its structure, but a complete emulation. Every neuron, every chemical whisper, every flicker of electricity translated into computation. Would that machine, if it spoke and remembered and felt like you, be you? Or would it merely perform your reflection, like a mirror that talks back? This vision, sometimes called whole brain emulation, imagines a future where consciousness could, in theory, be uploaded. The notion begins with something simple. The brain is made of matter, and matter follows rules. If we could scan every cell, every connection, every molecule's position, we could, in principle, rebuild it in another medium. Silicon instead of carbon, data instead of flesh. The copy would think as you think, remember your past, even finish your sentences. But would it feel? To understand what's at stake, imagine a computer the size of a planet, humming with simulated neurons. Every second it processes quadrillions of signals, each corresponding to the dance of ions inside a living brain. You ask it a question, and it answers in your own voice, calm, measured, slightly amused. The illusion is perfect. But does it experience what it says, or is it a ghost of logic without a lantern behind the eyes? Anil Seth often uses a gentle analogy to explain the problem. A simulation of rain, he says, does not make you wet. The model may capture every droplet, every ripple of a puddle, every sound of thunder, but the computer remains dry. In the same way, a perfect simulation of a brain may reproduce the patterns of consciousness without ever producing consciousness itself. It can imitate thought, but imitation is not experience. This has been called the wetness test. When you simulate water, you can describe its properties mathematically, its temperature, its flow, its turbulence, but you can't drink it. There's something in the physical interaction, the molecular dance, that no symbol or equation can fully replace. Consciousness might be like that. It may depend not only on information but on the living material that carries it, on the warmth, the metabolism, the ceaseless turnover of cells. If that's true, then the dream of uploading minds may be just that, a dream. A digital version of you could mimic every choice and memory, but without the fragile chemistry of life, it might lack the inward glow that makes a being aware. It would be like a candle painted perfectly on a screen, bright, yes, but cold. Still, the appeal of this dream is hard to resist. It promises escape from decay, a kind of technological immortality. If consciousness could be copied, then death would no longer erase us, it would only relocate us. Our minds could drift through circuits instead of blood. But here again lies the quiet contradiction. The you that wakes up inside the machine, if it truly does wake, would not be you but a perfect twin, starting a new line of experience. The original would still end. The simulation would remember being you, but it would never have lived through your final heartbeat. This paradox has a haunting beauty to it. It reminds us that what makes life precious may be its impermanence. Consciousness, as we know it, is bound to matter that ages and fades. It's not stored data. It's a momentary alignment of atoms, holding itself together against entropy. The act of living is what gives meaning to the experience of being alive. Without that fragility, awareness might lose its depth, like a song that never ends, and therefore loses its melody. Philosophers sometimes call this the matter that matters problem. Meaning arises not from pattern alone, but from matter that has something at stake. A living brain cares about its own continuation. It burns energy, heals itself, and trembles with the effort of being. A simulation, no matter how perfect, feels nothing if it cannot care whether it continues or stops. Consciousness may require that caring, the self-concern that life alone can produce. You can think of this difference in simpler terms. A living neuron is a small universe. Inside it, chemical gradients pulse, membranes breathe, proteins fold and unfold. It exists not only as a node in a network, but as a tiny organism, constantly in motion. each one lives and dies within the larger being that hosts it. A simulated neuron, on the other hand, is a line of code, stable, timeless, indifferent. It doesn't tire, doesn't repair, doesn't hunger. Its perfection is precisely what disqualifies it from life. This doesn't mean that digital minds are impossible. It just means that if they ever become conscious, it won't be by imitating us pixel by pixel, but by developing their own kind of aliveness, perhaps a self-sustaining system of computation that consumes, adapts, and regenerates. A true artificial consciousness might not think like us at all. It might be something stranger, more fluid, a being whose awareness emerges from dynamics we can barely imagine. For now, our simulations are mirrors, and mirrors are powerful teachers. When we build machines that imitate thought, they show us what thought is and what it isn't. They remind us that intelligence and experience are not the same. That understanding can exist without awareness. A machine can tell you that you are sad. Only a living mind can feel sadness. And so the question of whole brain emulation becomes less about technology and more about philosophy. If you could copy yourself perfectly, down to every synapse, would the copy have rights? Would it grieve, hope, dream? Or would it merely resemble those things the way a photograph resembles a smile? Perhaps the answer lies in empathy. To recognize consciousness is to feel its presence, the unmistakable warmth of a being that experiences. You sense it in the gaze of another human, in the playfulness of an animal, even in the delicate hesitation of your own reflection. If one day a machine gives you that same sense, if it hesitates, listens, and responds not as a script but as something alive, then perhaps it will have crossed that invisible line. Until then, it helps to remember that our minds are not code to be preserved but flames to be tended. They flicker, they change, they burn through time. To simulate the flame is to capture its shape but not its heat. The real miracle is not that a machine might someday emulate us, but that we exist at all. That the universe has learned, however briefly, to look at itself through the eyes of a living, feeling thing. Picture yourself waking slowly. The light through the curtains is soft and patient, the kind that seems to wait for you to return to the world. You open your eyes, and the familiar shapes around you appear. The ceiling, the wall, the gentle clutter of your own life. You believe without question that these things are real, that they exist not only for you but for everyone. Yet deep down you know that what you see is not the world itself, but the world as your mind paints it. From the moment you wake, perception begins as a private act. The brain receives fragments, wavelengths of light, vibrations of air, pressure on the skin, and transforms them into meaning. You do not see light, you see colour. You do not hear vibration, you hear music. The brain builds its own version of reality, an internal theatre where neurons perform the outside world. And yet, what's astonishing is not that each of us lives in our own constructed world. It's that somehow our private worlds overlap enough that we can call it shared. Anil Seth calls this overlap the controlled hallucination. It sounds almost poetic, each mind generating its own model of the world, constantly updating it with sensory feedback so that our hallucinations synchronize. When we agree that a sky is blue, we are agreeing not on the world itself, but on the harmony between our different ways of seeing. Reality, in that sense, is a fragile truce between many private dreams. This illusion of shared reality is what makes civilization possible. Without it, no conversation could hold, no city could stand. You and I can talk about the same tree, the same moon, the same memory, because our brains have evolved to predict the world in similar ways. Each person's experience is unique, but the patterns rhyme. That quiet resonance between minds, that gentle consensus, is what we call the real. Think for a moment about how fragile that consensus really is. The colour red, for instance, is not an inherent property of an object. It's how our brains interpret a certain range of light. To a different creature, the same light might appear ultraviolet or invisible. The world itself is colourless. The hues are woven by perception. And yet, to us, the red of an apple feels utterly real. Our brains are experts at taking what's useful and calling it truth. They evolved not to show us the world as it is, but the world that helps us survive within it. If our perception were a perfect mirror of reality, it would be overwhelming. Too much detail, too little meaning. So the mind edits, simplifies, guesses. It gives you just enough of the world to live meaningfully in it. That act of guessing, when shared among billions of people, becomes culture, language, and science. The collective dream of humanity trying to make sense of itself. Sometimes that shared dream fractures. Illusions, delusions, or altered states remind us how personal perception really is. Two people can look at the same event and remember it differently, because memory is not a recording but a reconstruction. Another layer of the dream. Even time itself feels subjective. A minute of joy passes differently than a minute of pain. We measure seconds with clocks, but we live them through feeling. Perhaps that's what makes empathy so extraordinary. To feel with another person is to bridge two private worlds, if only for a moment. When you look into someone's eyes and recognize emotion there, you are trusting that their inner light is like your own. It's not proof, it's faith. The quiet assumption that another mind exists behind that gaze. That assumption, repeated billions of times a day, is what keeps the human world stitched together. The philosopher Thomas Nagel once wrote that consciousness is what it is like to be something. There is something it is like to be you. Something it is like to be a bird. Perhaps even something it is like to be a single neuron firing in the dark. When we speak of shared reality, we're really talking about the possibility that those countless something it is likes overlap just enough to touch. From this view, the world is not a fixed stage upon which consciousness appears. The world emerges from consciousness, from the collective agreement of minds mapping and remapping their experiences. It's a shared creation, revised every instant by perception, conversation, and memory. And though no two minds see the same world, the miracle is that they see enough of the same to coexist. Science and philosophy have always wrestled with this paradox. On one side stands realism, the belief that the world exists independently of us. On the other stands idealism, the view that reality is inseparable from experience. The truth may lie in the middle, a quiet compatibilism of its own, a universe that is both real and reinterpreted, objective in existence but subjective in meaning. So perhaps the best we can do is to approach reality with humility, to know that the colour you see, the sound you hear, the feeling you hold, all are your mind's best guesses, grounded in biology and shared through empathy. This awareness doesn't make the world less real, it makes it more miraculous. Every agreement, every word, every smile exchange between two people is a moment of alignment between private universes. When you step outside at night and look at the stars, you can feel this quiet connection. Billions of eyes, past and present, have looked up at the same sky, each seeing a slightly different shade, yet feeling the same wonder. That's the shared dream, the fragile miracle that turns isolated minds into a species. And as the light fades to night, you might sense how this idea loops back to the beginning. The illusion of shared reality is not a flaw, it's a bridge. It allows minds, each alone in their inner darkness, to meet halfway in the glow of understanding. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every moment of listening is a small repair to the fabric of that dream. If your eyes are closing now, let them. The world you see when you sleep will be yours alone, private, intimate, wordless. But even there, in dreams, you'll carry traces of the shared one, the voices you've heard, the faces you've loved, the light that all of us imagine differently but still call the same sun. And when you wake again, the world will reassemble around you, painted anew by your mind, waiting for you to step back into the great collective story we call reality. So rest easy in that thought. You are part of a shared dream, a harmony of differences that somehow holds together. The universe hums through every eye that opens, every mind that wonders, and every quiet soul that looks out at the same sky and feels, however briefly, that they belong to something larger and something wonderfully awake.